For the vast majority of time that I've been studying quantum biology, which is, about a decade now, I've been focusing on what's happening with the physical body. So things like how the water inside of us provides this beautiful battery of potential energy, and how that water is also an antenna. I talk a lot about how sunlight physically interacts with receptors in our eyes and on our skin to do things like sync our circadian rhythm and provide a lot of the healing benefits of sunlight. I talk about the mitochondria and how they make that water for us that we can structure into this beautiful, easy water battery. And I even talk about earthing and how we can flow electrons into our physical body to reestablish healthy negative charge in all the places that it's needed, such as, for example, around the red blood cells, and even in areas where we have excessive inflammation to calm the inflammation using Earth's antioxidant, which is free energy electrons, right? However, it's been within the past 2 years or so that I started to get into what I would call more ether physics, or the understanding of what's happening in this invisible space around me beyond what's happening with the electromagnetic waves, aka the light, the non-native EMFs, those sorts of things. And so I want to take us back in time a little bit with quantum physics to the late 1800s. I want to say this was 1893, but don't hold me to that exact timeline. But in the late 1800s, there was supposedly an experiment that was done to debunk the presence of something called an ether. And this ether, interestingly, the concept of an ether has literally been around for thousands and thousands of years, and it's gone by many names. It's gone by things like ki and chi and orgon and vital life force energy and the Akashic record, Shakti. It's had so many different names, right? And at one point, I think I counted over 90 different names for all of the different civilizations who have had the understanding of this presence of an ether. So first and foremost, what am I talking about? Well, there is actually a field of information and energy that surrounds us and permeates us and connects everything in the universe. It's also been called more recently things like the fabric of space and the quantum field, or the 0-point field or 0-point energy. And I'm going to talk about some of the key properties of this field in a moment. But first, I want to talk about how quantum physics actually tried to debunk the presence of this field. The thought process went something like this, which doesn't make any sense to me, but it went something like this. It went something like, well, we know sound is a wave and it needs a medium to travel through called air. And sound can also even travel through water, right? But it requires a medium for propagation. And then you had the idea that water travels in waves as well, but you need the water itself as the medium through which those waves can move. And then all of a sudden we have this wave that's called electromagnetism, or light, right? And there was an assumption that no, light can move through a vacuum. It doesn't have to propagate through anything. It can just move completely through a vacuum of nothingness, literal nothingness. And so for whatever reason, quantum physics went to debunk the presence of this ether that has been around for millennia, right? And the ether was known for a long time as the medium through which light propagates. And so at the end of the 1800s, an experiment was done called the Michelson-Morley experiment, where they set up this interesting experiment to measure something called ether drag, or kind of like the presence of an ether on their equipment and their devices. And it turns out that they didn't find any ether. There was no ether that was measurable using their experiment and their devices. So at that moment in time, literally the ether died and it was debunked. And, all of these ancient civilizations know nothing. That's silly talk. And instead, we are going to move forward from henceforth with the idea that light travels through a vacuum. There is no medium that connects all of space. There is nothing that connects you to me to you. There's nothing, there's no pervasive energy field whatsoever, which, kind of sounds a little foolish, right? And so unfortunately, I think quantum physics took a huge step backwards for literally almost 100 years. Now, in the beginning, Einstein was a huge proponent of this experiment by saying, okay, yes, the ether's debunked. And then he tried to come up with different theories, general relativity, special relativity, but nothing really worked if you couldn't understand that there was a pervasive field that connected everything. And so even towards the end of his career, Einstein said, yes, there absolutely must be a medium. There must be an ether. And now modern physicists are finally catching up again. And this is not, I'm not trying to criticize them, right? But I do believe it was just kind of like a sad mistake that took place during this chunk of time to say that light doesn't need a medium through which it propagates. And so now we've actually, you know, rediscovered the ether with names such as the 0-point energy field, the quantum field, just 0-point energy in general. And here's what I know now about the ether. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert on this at all, but I find this very fascinating. And this is how it also applies to our health and our physiology. And even things like action at a distance, healing action at a distance, prayer, the healing benefit of prayer. There's everything can be described now through the presence of this medium. So this ether is actually what we know of. You want to think of this field that surrounds us and literally penetrates all the depths to inside every single one of our atoms. You want to view this field as behaving like a fluid of light that contains charge, and we can't see it. So almost it's like these waves, they're actually longitudinal waves, right? They propagate like this. So these waves, like a slinky, right? Like a slinky. So these waves of light that are full of charge that surround us, and that we actually are drawing energy from the charge found in this 0-point field. So originally they said that the reason they called it 0-point energy, the fact that there's energy at this 0 point, was they supercooled various spaces they supercooled space essentially, like in a laboratory setting. And they still found that even when everything was frozen to the extent that there should be no molecular vibrations, AKA no energy, they still measured the presence of energy. And so it was calculated that the ether, literally in 1 cup of this ether or this 0-point energy, there's enough potential energy to ignite and burn and essentially dry up all of the oceans on the planet Earth in just 1 tiny cup, right? And so the idea that we can actually draw ourselves, that we can draw energy from the ether, again, it's not new. This has been thought of as, essentially prana and vital life force energy, and so many other names that I know I can't give full credit to where it's due. And so here's where I began to wrap my brain around this. And this combines both the concept of the ether through the work of Dan Winter, along with the concept of the human biofield, and also my understanding of how things like meditation and mindset and prayer and all of these things work to help support healing. So, talking about like the work, for example, of Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so what I view is like we have this biofield around us. This biofield is essentially a torus, which is a torus flow of energy. And it behaves like a plasma. And what we actually know about plasma, another word for plasma is just charged gas, right? But it's essentially the stage between liquid, so you have solid, liquid, gas, then we've got plasma, and then we've got ether. It's a continuum. There is one fundamental substance, ether. That's the name I'm giving it. We could also call this, you could call this beautiful energy divine consciousness, God. You can call it so many different beautiful names. But essentially there's one fundamental substance, and that this substance then can organize itself in different ways to create the different stages of matter, the different states of matter. And so this video is not necessarily the time and place to talk about essentially how ether can implode to create hydrogen, but that's a whole topic in and of itself. So, but what I'm saying is we have our physical bodies, and around our physical bodies, we have these plasma layers that have also been called the aura, right? Or the biofield. And this energy is circulating both back into us and around us, and into us and around us. And so the fields of our body, this beautiful plasma field of our body, is actually flowing into our physical body and informing our physical bodies on how to return to homeostasis, which is how to return to optimum health given the situation we're in, the environmental inputs and things like that, our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our traumas. And so all of this is flowing back into us to inform our physical body on how to return to homeostasis. So that being said, though, what we know about plasmas is that plasmas can develop a very intelligent behavior. Again, potentially beyond the scope of this video right here, But what we do know is that certain emotions can affect how the plasma behaves, right? Meaning, and also can affect how we physically, personally influence the ether and how it implodes into us. So not only are we renewing ourselves with this bioplasma and informing our body with this bioplasma biofield, but we're literally imploding ether. Have you ever seen those ancient images with a beam through the head, right? Where you see that there is an energy source that's being pulled into the physical body. This is, in my opinion, their representation of the ether and how we are actually vortexing and imploding the ether into our body into a point of charge that then we can distribute throughout our body as vital life force energy and then into our biofield to renew ourselves. So it's this idea of how well we can implode the ether dictates how much vital life force energy we can hold and distribute throughout our tissues and then into our aura or our biofield, which is why oftentimes you see images of people who supposedly have a greater connection to consciousness, to source, to God, as having these beautiful, very large, filled golden biofields, right? Or golden auras. I think what's fascinating is, in more modern times, there are ways that we can measure someone's aura via things like the BioWell that Dr. Korotkov has utilized it so many times in his research. And you can see that there literally are, essentially his measurements take a gas discharge visualization camera. They do Kirlian photography to visualize the plasma extending away from the physical human body. And you can see how that plasma or aura can have gaps and holes, or it can shrink in response to different things, and then it can expand in response to different things. So, for example, exposures to toxins, to hatred and fear, things like that can actually start to create gaps and shrink one's plasma body, one's biofield. And then emotions such as love, gratitude, compassion, in conjunction with things like drinking good quality structured water even, can expand one's biofield and one's plasma. And so I think it's pretty naive for me to think that all I am is my physical body. And so I've tried to start to coach this up in my clients as well through things like mindset and meditation, and especially the feelings that we choose to engage with on a regular basis. And the one, I'll say the one feeling that I try to coach up the most frequently, maybe similar to another. So the two feelings I try to coach up most frequently are compassion and gratitude, right? Those have both been shown to be very impactful in how they structure water coherently. That's the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto, for example, along with the work of Dr. Korotkov, along with looking at things like how Veda Austin has so beautifully looked at water and how responsive water is to things like our emotions, but also images as well. So remember, our body is water. It's an antenna for information. But we have also know now that because ether behaves like a fluid, ether is also a responsive fluid medium to our emotions, to our intention and attention. And so what I have seen and what I'm also hypothesizing is that our emotions dictate basically how much vital life force energy we are compressing from the ether into our physical bodies. And if we can compress it in this beautiful pattern, which happens to be a phi spiral, that is, and the perfect way to do that, bear with me, is compassion. If we can live as best as possible a life of compassion, we are actually able to draw more life force energy from the ether. We can physically implode that. And then from that implosion, there's always a distribution. So implode the charge and distribute the charge. Implode the charge and distribute the charge. And not only are we actually doing that in a means of physically creating life force vital energy for our bodies to draw from, through the act of compassion, we are also creating appropriate signaling through heart rate variability, through the brain, through the heart-brain communication that can take place to optimize things like gene expression, protein expression, things like that, to the literal magnetic field of the heart, that is a field of magnetism that is always informing our electrical bodies. Remember, electrical beings respond and are influenced by magnetism. So of course, our heart, which has the strongest magnetic field signal from our whole entire body, is absolutely always influencing our physical body, especially the electrical components of our bodies. So this is where, yes, we can talk about emotions as, yeah, I know I should be positive, or yeah, I should have more gratitude, should have more joy. I want people to realize how really imperative it is to try to cultivate a life where they are living in more compassion, joy, and gratitude, and less fear, hatred, and negativity. Not to say that there's not things that I get mad at stuff. Certainly I do. Or there, of course, every once in a while I experience moments of fear. But I try now, through this lens that I'm understanding how my body is interacting with my emotions and the field and the water inside of me, I have really tried to cultivate a life where I can express those feelings, but at the same time, I try to return back to a state of gratitude, joy, being in the present moment, compassion as best as I can. And yes, it takes practice, but now, I mean, I feel like by now my default state really truly is as a joyful, compassionate person. And that's great, because I would say, approximately 4 years ago, I was way more living in fear, or maybe even divisiveness than I most definitely am currently living right now. And so, yes, it takes coaching. Yes, it takes maybe this understanding of how important it is. But because of my understanding of how important and how vital, literally, I am imploding life force energy, and how well I'm doing that is based on my emotions, it literally has changed how I interact with media, with news sources, with people, with things that don't bring me joy, right? I really try to sort through my life and understand where I can shift and change and pivot certain habits or certain routines to optimize this life force energy. And I don't have any scientific research right now that I could throw at you to quote unquote prove that what I'm saying is true, except millennia's worth of other civilizations and cultures who have also understood this beautiful concept of life force energy, in conjunction with, there is some beautiful research out there that does talk about how our thoughts and our emotions can create vortexes in the ether. And also this idea of how our biofield is physically informing our physical body. So combining all these things together, I truly believe that this is the next level of my teaching, to help people teach their own bodies how to heal. Yes, our physical bodies, we can do so much to support our physical bodies. But at the same time, I don't think we take into consideration the fact that the field informs our physical, and that we can also influence the field through things like our thoughts and our emotions. So hope that wasn't too woo for you. And yeah, I'd love to at some point to hear your thoughts on this.